What if I told you that right now, while you're watching this video, the entire global economy is going through a transformation so massive that it will change everything about how the world works? And what's even more shocking is that most people have no idea it's happening. Welcome to Money Aftermath, where we break down the financial earthquakes that shape our future. I'm so glad you're here with me today because what we're about to discuss is absolutely critical to understanding where the world is headed. Before we dive in, if you want to stay ahead of these seismic economic shifts and understand what they mean for your money and your future, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. And if you find value in today's analysis, leave a comment below telling me what you think. Your engagement helps this channel reach more people who need to understand these changes. Now, let me ask you something. Have you noticed that prices for certain products seem incredibly low lately? Have you wondered why manufacturing jobs keep disappearing from Western countries? Have you questioned why Germany, once the pride of European industry, seems to be struggling? All of these things are connected, and today we're going to connect those dots in a way that will completely change how you see the global economy. What's unfolding right now is nothing less than a complete restructuring of who makes things, who buys things, and who holds economic power in the world. And at the center of this transformation are two massive developments that are happening simultaneously. First, we have China facing an internal economic crisis that it's desperately trying to export to the rest of the world. Second, we have Germany and Europe's industrial foundation crumbling in real time. These aren't separate stories. They're two sides of the same coin, and understanding how they fit together is essential. Let me start with some numbers that should make everyone sit up and pay attention. In 2025, China's trade surplus crossed $1 trillion. Yes, you heard that correctly. $1 trillion. That means China sold $1 trillion more in goods to the world than it bought from the world. Now you might think that sounds like good business, right? China must be doing something right if everyone wants to buy their products. But here's the thing. This isn't a sign of strength. This is a sign of desperation. Think about what a trade surplus of that magnitude actually means. It means Chinese factories are producing an enormous amount of goods that Chinese consumers aren't buying. Why aren't Chinese consumers buying? Because they don't have the money or the confidence to spend. China's economy is supposed to be transitioning toward a model where its own citizens drive growth through consumption, just like in the United States or Europe. But instead of moving in that direction, China is moving in the opposite direction. It's becoming more dependent on exports, not less. Here's where it gets really interesting. Official Chinese statistics say that exports contributed about 29% of GDP growth in the first 9 months of 2025. That's already a huge number. But independent research from a consultancy called Rhodium Group suggests the real figure is actually over 50%. More than half of China's economic growth is coming from selling things to other countries. For the world's second-largest economy, that's not normal. That's not sustainable. That's a crisis. So why is this happening? What's going on inside China that's forcing it to rely so heavily on exports? The answer is something economists call a deflationary spiral, and it's absolutely devastating. Let me explain what that means and why it matters so much. For 4.5 years straight, home prices in China have been falling. 4.5 years. In most countries, your home is your biggest asset. It's where most of your wealth is stored. When home prices fall for that long, people feel poor. They feel like their life savings are disappearing. And when people feel poor, they stop spending money. They stop buying new cars, new appliances, new clothes. They cut back on everything except absolute necessities. The scale of this wealth destruction in China is comparable to what happened in the United States during the 2008 housing crash. But here's the terrifying difference. In the US, housing prices eventually bottomed out and started recovering. In China, they're still falling. The crisis is still getting worse, not better. Consumer confidence has completely collapsed. People are scared about the future, so they're saving every penny they can instead of spending. This creates a vicious cycle. When consumers don't spend, businesses don't invest. Why would a company build a new factory or hire more workers if nobody's buying their products? So investment falls. And when investment falls, there are fewer jobs. And when there are fewer jobs, people have even less money to spend. Round and round it goes, each turn making things worse. The numbers bear this out in a really stark way. Producer prices in China, that's the prices that factories charge for the goods they make, have been falling for more than 3 years in a row. 3 consecutive years of deflation at the producer level. And the forecasts for 2026 show this continuing, with producer prices expected to fall by nearly 1%. This will be the longest deflationary streak ever recorded in China. Consumer price inflation, meanwhile, is projected to stay barely above zero, essentially flat. Now, any government facing this situation has a choice. They can stimulate the economy by putting money directly into people's pockets. They can create programs that encourage spending. They can reform the system to make people feel more secure about the future so they're willing to spend rather than save. This is what most economists would recommend. But here's the problem. China's leadership isn't doing that. In December, at a major economic policy meeting, Chinese officials explicitly acknowledged the problem. They said there's a serious imbalance between strong domestic production capacity and weak consumer demand. In other words, factories can make lots of stuff, but people aren't buying it. So they see the problem clearly. They understand what's wrong. But the solutions they're proposing are completely inadequate. In early 2026, China's National Development and Reform Commission allocated $9 billion for consumer trade-in programs. These are programs where the government gives you a discount to replace your old car or refrigerator with a new one. $9 billion might sound like a lot of money, but in the context of China's enormous economy, it's basically nothing. It represents about 0.2% of quarterly GDP. It's a token gesture. And here's the kicker. China tried a similar program in 2025 with even more money, and it had virtually no impact on overall consumer spending. Despite all the talk, all the announcements, all the press releases about boosting consumption, Beijing isn't serious about it. They're not willing to do what it takes. So what is China doing instead? They're doubling down on manufacturing. The government is pouring massive amounts of money into advanced manufacturing sectors. Electric vehicles, renewable energy equipment, semiconductors, advanced machinery. These are high-tech, high-value industries, and China is investing in them at a scale that's hard to comprehend. But here's the problem with this strategy. When you massively expand production capacity while your domestic market is shrinking, you create overcapacity. Chinese factories are now producing far more goods than Chinese consumers can possibly buy. Solar panels, electric vehicles, steel, chemicals, electronics, you name it. China is making more of it than its own market can absorb. When you have this much overcapacity, you have only one option. You have to export. You have to find customers in other countries to buy all this excess production. Otherwise, factories shut down, workers lose their jobs, and the whole economy collapses. So China is flooding global markets with its products. And because Chinese companies are desperate to keep factories running and workers employed, they're selling at prices that often don't even cover their full costs. They're willing to lose money on each sale just to maintain production volume. This isn't normal market competition. This isn't about being efficient or innovative. This is about a country trying to export its way out of an economic crisis that it refuses to solve at home. Let me put this in perspective. When a country is experiencing deflation domestically and it floods international markets with cheap goods, it's not just competing on price, it's exporting its deflation. It's forcing prices down in other countries too. Chinese manufacturers sell products at prices that domestic manufacturers in other countries simply cannot match, even if those domestic manufacturers are efficient and well-run. Now, who's bearing the brunt of this massive wave of cheap Chinese exports? Europe, and more specifically Germany. What's happening to Germany right now is genuinely historic, and I don't use that word lightly. We need to talk about this because it represents a fundamental shift in global economic power. Germany's economy contracted by 0.2% in 2024. That came after a contraction of 0.3% in 2023, 2 consecutive years of economic shrinkage. Let me emphasize this point. Germany is the only economy in the G7, the only major advanced economy in the entire world that contracted in 2024. While the United States was growing, while the UK was growing, while France and Italy at least posted small positive numbers, Germany shrank. And the projections for 2026 aren't much better. Different forecasters have slightly different numbers, but they all cluster around 0.8 to 1.3% growth. After 2 years of contraction, Germany is expected to barely crawl forward with maybe 1% growth. That's not recovery. That's stagnation. One of Germany's most respected economic research institutes called this Germany's greatest crisis in the entire post-war period. Let that sink in for a moment. The greatest crisis since World War II. That means this is worse than the shock of reunification in the 1990s when East and West Germany merged. It's worse than the 2008 financial crisis. It's worse than the European debt crisis of the early 2010s. This is structural economic collapse happening in slow motion. Another major research institute is projecting a third consecutive year of recession in 2025. The president of one prominent economic think tank stated bluntly that the German economy is increasingly falling into crisis. Another economist described Germany as having settled into stagnation, as if this is the new normal. So what happened? How did Germany, the engine that powered European growth for decades, end up in this position? The answer has two main components, and both are directly linked to China and to global economic shifts. First, energy. Germany's entire industrial model was built on one crucial foundation: cheap natural gas from Russia. For years, Germany got reliable, affordable energy from Russian pipelines, and this made German manufacturing highly competitive. Energy-intensive industries like chemicals, steel, manufacturing all relied on this cheap energy. Then Russia invaded Ukraine, and Western nations imposed sanctions. Suddenly, that cheap Russian gas was cut off. Germany faced an energy crisis that struck at the heart of its economic model. Energy prices in Germany today are roughly double what they were before this crisis began. And compared to the United States, German energy prices are 3 to 4 times higher. Think about what that means for a manufacturer. If you're running a chemical plant or a steel mill, energy is one of your biggest costs. If your energy suddenly costs 3 or 4 times what your competitors in other countries are paying, you can't compete. Your products become more expensive, and customers go elsewhere. You cannot run an energy-intensive industrial economy on energy that costs 3 to 4 times what your rivals pay. It's that simple. But the energy crisis, as devastating as it is only half the story. The second part is even more fundamental, and this is where China comes in directly. Germany's export model is broken. For decades, Germany's economy ran on a simple formula. German companies made high-end manufactured goods like luxury cars, industrial machinery, precision equipment, advanced chemicals, and they sold these products to China. China was the customer. China was developing rapidly, building infrastructure, expanding its industries, and it needed the advanced products that Germany made. This was a perfect symbiotic relationship. China got the technology and equipment it needed to develop, and Germany got a huge and growing market for its exports. But that model is dead now. China has moved up the value chain. Chinese companies aren't buying German cars anymore because Chinese manufacturers like BYD are now making electric vehicles that are often better and always cheaper than what German companies produce. China doesn't need German machinery anymore because it's making its own. And increasingly Chinese machinery is just as good or better than German products. But it's actually worse than that. China isn't just no longer a customer. China is now a direct competitor. Chinese companies are now competing with German companies for customers in third countries all around the world. And because of the deflationary crisis I described earlier, Chinese companies are selling at prices that German manufacturers simply cannot match. German manufacturers are being squeezed from both directions at once. On one side, their costs are rising because of expensive energy. On the other side, the prices they can charge are falling because Chinese competitors are flooding markets with cheaper alternatives. This is an impossible situation. The data tells the story clearly. German industrial production has fallen significantly over recent years. Household spending in Germany dropped by nearly 1% recently. The unemployment rate is projected to climb to over 6%, with more than 150,000 additional people losing their jobs. Companies across Germany are reporting weak demand for their products and a serious deterioration in their competitive position internationally. And here's the part that should alarm everyone. German companies are giving up on Germany itself. They're moving their operations elsewhere. Let me give you some concrete examples. BASF, one of Germany's largest and most important chemical companies, is investing 10 billion euros in a new factory. 10 billion euros. That's an enormous investment. But where are they building this factory? Not in Germany. In China. They're investing in the country that's undercutting German industry because that's where they see the future. Germany's second-largest private bank, Commerzbank, is facing a potential takeover by an Italian bank called UniCredit. Deutsche Post sold its logistics subsidiary to a Danish competitor. Foreign direct investment into Germany has fallen sharply. International investors and even German companies themselves are looking at Germany and deciding it's no longer an attractive place to do business. This is capital flight. Money and investment are leaving Germany for other countries that offer better prospects. Companies are relocating to China, to the United States, to anywhere that has lower energy costs, less regulation, and better growth prospects than Germany's stagnant economy. Now you might be thinking, surely Germany can turn this around. Surely the government can do something. And yes, the new German government has proposed what they call a growth initiative. The package includes tax breaks for companies, efforts to reduce energy prices for industry, cutting bureaucratic red tape, and incentives to keep older workers in the labor force. The government is also planning to increase deficit spending, with the budget deficit expected to reach 4% of GDP in 2026. But here's the fundamental problem. Germany's challenges are structural, not temporary. You can't fix a broken industrial model with a few tax breaks. You can't compete with China's manufacturing overcapacity by cutting some regulations. And while Germany's increased spending might help a bit, much of it is going towards social programs and pensions rather than productive investment that would actually rebuild competitiveness. Business associations in Germany have been quite blunt about this. They say the growth package is welcome, but it's nowhere near enough to truly get Germany back on track. Economic advisors have warned that the government risks wasting investment by using too much of the borrowed money for pensions and social spending instead of addressing the core competitiveness issues. And the problem isn't just Germany. The entire Eurozone is suffering. The European Commission forecasts that the EU as a whole will barely exceed 1% growth in 2026. France is projected to grow 1.1%. Italy 0.8%. Spain is doing better at 1.8%. But that's mainly driven by tourism, not industrial strength. Europe as a continent is stagnating, and with Germany in crisis, there's no engine to pull everyone else forward. Let me connect all these pieces together because it's absolutely crucial to understand how they fit. China is trapped in a deflationary crisis caused by a collapsing property market and weak consumer demand. Chinese leadership refuses to solve this problem through domestic stimulus because they prioritize political control and technological advancement over consumption-led growth. So instead, China floods global markets with cheap manufactured goods to keep growth going and maintain employment. This flood of Chinese exports is crushing competitors worldwide, but especially in Europe and particularly in Germany. Germany was already weakened by losing access to cheap Russian energy. Now German manufacturers can't compete with Chinese overcapacity on price, and they're losing market share both in foreign markets and even at home. German companies respond by moving production to China itself, which further hollows out Germany's industrial base. The result is that Germany enters what looks increasingly like a permanent recession, not a temporary downturn. And because Germany is Europe's largest economy and has traditionally been the growth engine for the continent, Germany's stagnation drags down the entire European Union. The EU cannot achieve meaningful growth when its biggest member is in crisis. Meanwhile, the underlying problem keeps intensifying. China's domestic demand is not recovering, which means China will continue depending on exports. In fact, major financial institutions expect China's current account surplus to rise to over 4% of GDP in 2026, up from around 3.6% in 2025. Most economists had expected it to decline, but it's actually increasing. China is going to keep flooding global markets with cheap goods because it has no alternative. And here's the truly frightening part. There's no obvious solution to any of this. Germany cannot easily fix its energy problem. Even if the government manages to reduce energy costs somewhat, they'll still be far higher than before the crisis and far higher than in the United States or other competitors. Germany cannot force China to stop exporting. It cannot suddenly rebuild its industrial competitiveness overnight. And the European Union as a whole lacks the fiscal capacity and political unity to mount a coordinated response at the scale that would be needed. What we're witnessing is a fundamental realignment of global economic power. The West, particularly Europe, built its prosperity on industrial manufacturing. For decades, European countries, especially Germany, made high-quality manufactured goods and sold them to the world. That era is ending right before our eyes. China has evolved from being the workshop for cheap, low-quality goods to being a serious competitor across almost the entire manufacturing spectrum. And China's current economic crisis is only accelerating this trend by forcing Chinese companies to export at any price just to survive. Some economists describe this as a new form of economic conflict, though China would argue it's simply responding to market forces and competitive pressures. Regardless of what we call it, the effect is the same. European manufacturing is being hollowed out. Germany, the continent's industrial powerhouse, is experiencing its worst crisis since the Second World War, and there's no clear path to recovery. Now, let me be absolutely clear about something. I'm not saying Germany will disappear or that Europe will collapse entirely. These are still wealthy, developed economies with many strengths, educated workforces, strong institutions, and technological capabilities. But I am saying we're witnessing a historic shift in global manufacturing power, and Europe is on the losing end of that transformation. The old model, where Germany produced high-value manufactured goods and sold them to a growing Chinese market, is finished. The new reality is that China produces manufactured goods across the entire value spectrum and sells them to the world at prices that reflect its domestic overcapacity and deflationary crisis. This shift has profound implications that will touch everyone's lives. For workers in European manufacturing industries, it means continued job losses and downward pressure on wages. For European governments, it means lower tax revenues from struggling industries and higher spending on unemployment benefits and social support. For European consumers, it means access to cheaper Chinese products, which might sound positive until you realize it's contributing to the destruction of your own industrial base and the disappearance of good-paying jobs in your community. For the global economy overall, it means persistent imbalances, with China running enormous trade surpluses while other countries, particularly in Europe, run corresponding trade deficits. It means continued deflationary pressure globally as China exports its deflation through cheap goods. And it means rising trade tensions as countries struggle to protect their domestic industries from Chinese overcapacity without triggering a full-scale trade war. The big question for 2026 and beyond is how this situation resolves. Will China eventually succeed in rebalancing its economy toward domestic consumption and reduce its reliance on exports? The evidence strongly suggests no, at least not in the near to medium term. Beijing's policies continue to prioritize investment and exports over consumption. The political system isn't set up to make the dramatic changes that would be needed. Will Europe and the United States impose tariffs and trade barriers to protect their industries from Chinese competition? Possibly, and we're already seeing some movement in this direction. But this approach carries serious risks. It could trigger a full-scale trade war that pushes the global economy into recession and makes everyone worse off. Will Germany somehow find a way to revive its industrial competitiveness? Given the structural challenges around energy costs, Chinese competition, and demographic decline, this seems extremely difficult. It's not impossible, but it would require changes so fundamental that they're hard to imagine happening quickly. What seems most likely based on current trends is that we're entering a prolonged period of slow growth in Europe, persistent global trade imbalances, and ongoing industrial decline in Western economies as manufacturing continues to concentrate in China and other Asian countries. This isn't a temporary shock that will pass. This is a new equilibrium, a new normal, and it's one that's far less favorable to the West than the world we've known for the past several decades. The implications of this shift are staggering when you really think about them. Economic power and political power are deeply connected. For the past century, the West, particularly the United States, and Europe has dominated the global economy and used that economic power to shape global rules, institutions, and norms. If economic power continues shifting eastward, political power will eventually follow. We're also seeing the fragmentation of the global economy into competing blocks. Rather than one integrated global market, we may be moving toward a world where there's a Western economic sphere, a Chinese economic sphere, and other countries forced to choose between them or try to navigate both. This fragmentation will make everyone poorer in the long run because it prevents the specialization and efficiency gains that come from global trade. For individuals trying to plan their financial futures, this transformation creates both challenges and opportunities. The challenges are obvious. If you work in manufacturing in a Western country, your job security is declining. If you own stocks in European industrial companies, their long-term prospects are questionable. If you're a young person trying to figure out what career to pursue, the old pathways into middle-class stability through manufacturing jobs are disappearing. But there are also opportunities. Understanding these shifts allows you to position yourself advantageously. Industries that can't be easily offshored, like certain services, healthcare, and skilled trades, become more valuable. Companies that can adapt to the new reality by moving production or changing their business models may thrive. Countries that can offer competitive advantages China doesn't have, like political stability, rule of law, or proximity to markets, can attract investment. The key is understanding that the world is changing and being prepared to adapt rather than hoping things will go back to how they were. They won't. The forces driving these changes are too powerful and too fundamental. So where does this leave us? We're living through a historic economic transformation that most people barely recognize is happening. China's internal crisis is reshaping global trade flows. Europe's industrial base is crumbling. The economic balance of power is shifting eastward. And the comfortable assumptions that shaped the post-Cold War era are being swept away. Understanding these dynamics won't make them less challenging, but it does allow us to make better decisions. Whether you're an investor trying to protect your wealth, a worker planning your career, a business owner thinking about strategy, or just someone trying to understand the world, recognizing these fundamental shifts is essential. What do you think about all of this? Do you believe Germany can find a way to recover? Can Europe compete with China's manufacturing dominance? Or are we truly witnessing the end of Western industrial leadership? I want to hear your perspective. Leave a comment below and let's discuss this. And if you found this analysis valuable, please share this video with others who need to understand these changes. The more people who grasp what's happening, the better prepared we all can be. This is exactly why Money Aftermath exists, to help you understand the financial earthquakes reshaping our world before they hit. If you haven't already subscribed, do it now so you don't miss future analyses. Hit that notification bell so you're alerted the moment I release new content. The changes we've discussed today are just the beginning, and there's much more to come. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I know this was a lot of information, but these are the conversations we need to be having. The global economy is being fundamentally restructured, and understanding how and why makes all the difference. I will see you in the next video where we will continue exploring the financial forces shaping our future. Until then, stay informed, stay prepared, and take care of yourself.